Hello, welcome. I'm Dr. Terry Ann Scott, Director of the Institute for Common Power, and you are at our Education to Action podcast that I host with Dr. Yohuru Williams. Welcome, Dr. Williams. How are you doing?
I am good under the circumstances, Professor Scott, but it is an interesting moment here in Minnesota, as you can imagine.
Which is why we wanted to do this podcast right now. So for those of you who are not aware, Dr. Yohuru Williams is a professor of history at St. Thomas University in Minneapolis. And he also runs an incredible center that focuses on racial justice in Minneapolis. Dr. Williams has also done an expansive amount of work with local law enforcement and local communities to try to hold law enforcement accountable for the ways that they have racialized policing in the city. And so he is really on the front lines in very many ways. And so we wanted to come together today to talk about what has happened with ICE and the murder of an American citizen here in Minneapolis, as well as the targeting of Somalian communities there. So, Dr. Williams, I don't know where to begin. Where do we start with this?
You know, I think for me, Professor Scott, what was most troubling today was Vice President J.D. Vance's attempt to suggest, and I know this bothered you as well, given our shared interest in the history of racial violence, particularly state-sanctioned violence, of absolute immunity for this officer who was engaged in the killing of Renee Nicole Good. And I was deeply disturbed by that because the implications of that, this coming, of course, just a day after the 5th year anniversary of January 6th, the president's own claims to absolute immunity, which the Supreme Court rubber stamped last year in that landmark case, the pardoning of the January 6th rioters, and now this effort on the part of the administration, not just to change the narrative, but to put into place some type of legal architecture that would absolve people from engaging in acts of violence, unconstitutional acts against American citizens without any investigation, without any due process. I'm deeply concerned by that. So in addition to the shooting, it was this, the typical efforts by the administration to explain away and to pretend to gaslight the American people. But this moment with J.D. Vance, the distinguished legal scholar that he pretends to be, making this case for absolute immunity, that I found absolutely terrifying. And I think all Americans should find that absolutely terrifying.
Right, because what do we have? We have a Supreme Court who had a ruling last year that placed the president above the law, contrary to our understanding, our longtime understanding of what happens in this country, that nobody is above the rule of law. And so now, by extension, this administration is placing all of their agents above the law as well. Any arm that does anything. And so it's just kind of unchecked violence now that they can do upon the American people. And Minneapolis officials have said today that they are being blocked in attempting to investigate what happened. And so it is very much this Orwellian, don't believe your eyes or your ears, believe what we are telling you. So it places us in a level of danger that in many ways is unprecedented. I mean, we saw aspects of this, obviously, in the modern civil rights movement, but we did not see the kind of unchecked impunity in which the federal government is functioning on such a public level. I mean, in many ways, I'd say that is unprecedented. So you are in Minneapolis, you are in the streets, you are with people. What are your suggestions? Because I think one of the things that people want to do is know is, what do we do? What do we do?
Well, you and I are going to be on the ground together in Montgomery in just about a month. And I think that people really need to, and I understand this is a moment where people are feeling kind of a deep despair about, and a hopelessness about whether there's anything they can do. But I think that people really have to lean into the legacy of the civil rights movement and to take the advice that was offered by Governor Walz here in Minnesota yesterday, which is that you have the absolute right to protest, that we really need to take to the streets and to engage in peaceful protest, lawful protest, which is our constitutional right. It's a way of affirming our rights under the U.S. Constitution in defiance of this administration, which clearly and flagrantly is violating the most basic tenets of American law and justice.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think at the same time, what's interesting for me is, and I think about this in the context of the civil rights movement, particularly this past week, the Trump administration is really trying to empower its brown shirts. And we talk a lot and make connections to the civil rights movement, but in a lot of ways in that moment, people were making connections to what they saw in terms of the rise of the National Socialists in Germany. And the efforts by, for example, the citizens' councils throughout the South and various law enforcement agencies in states like Mississippi and Alabama, which were empowered and acted with impunity. Sovereignty Committee, great example, to act with impunity toward black citizens.
Yeah.
So what we've been saying for a long time about Black history, now we're on the 100th anniversary of Black history coming up next month too. I heard you articulate this a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's so important. This is why people needed to study Black history. This is what we've been warning about. This is what Carter Woodson began that commemoration of Black history for. It wasn't solely because we wanted to celebrate the achievements of notable Black Americans or people of color, Black people. It was about this stark warning about the dangers to American democracy unchecked.
That's exactly right. Because what we see, people say, well, I learned about this leader, I did this, I've kind of covered all the bases. Why are we celebrating this? Why are we doing this? To your point, exactly, it is because what is rich in history is warnings. It is an understanding of what came before us, what has happened, and by extension, what can we do about it? When you're talking about the agents of the government in the past, who were the citizens' councils, mentioned the Sovereignty Commission. They are these not marginalized white nationalist groups. They were groups that were fully entrenched in local and statewide politics. And so we are seeing a rebirth of that all the way up to the federal level. I mean, we have ICE agents running around with swastikas. We're not going to pretend like most of them are not highly racist individuals who have gotten involved in this to wield power over people of color. And then something switches though in Minneapolis, because it doesn't then just become about that. And it is wholly tied to race. Let's be very clear. These ICE agents are first and foremost purging communities of Black and brown people. So that is 100% for sure. But now we see it as extending beyond that. That anybody who gets in the way, just like the modern civil rights movement, of what they're trying to do, regardless of who they are, even if they are a white woman who is a citizen, they will be subject to the violence that they can now do with unchecked whatever they would like to do. And I think for so many people, which is why I love seeing people pour into the streets with peaceful protests yesterday, they have a full understanding that we need to rise up and stop them. And when I say rise up, I say it in the way that you did, with the peaceful protest, with organizing, with voting, with making sure that we can vote the iniquitous out of office, because this all emanates from policy. Policy created by elected officials.
Couldn't agree more. And I think the other thing that's interesting for me, Dr. Scott, and I'd love to get your reflections on this, the comfort with the contradictions here, that this pledge, in an administration that has embraced wholeheartedly and offered a full-throated defense of white supremacy. Right. The argument that, and Trump made it on the campaign trail last summer consistently, this was about protecting white womanhood. Mm-hmm. And now you see Renee Nicole Good, the collateral damage in this war against Black and brown communities, in this effort to deport in Minnesota, ostensibly it's the Somalis, but insert Black or brown group here. Right. But I think this idea of, and Carrie Lee Merritt has a new biography on Lillian Smith, who was the woman who was in the car with Martin Luther King, and she talks about in the introduction to the biography, the fact that that's kind of written out of the history, that Dr. King was stopped on the pretext that he and Coretta were in the car with a white woman, and what did that represent? And so it was as much that proximity as it was the fact that he was involved in civil rights activity, that white people need to step up, that the inherent contradictions here are an invitation for us to reflect on, as you indicated, this racial history, but also the important intersection of race and gender, particularly with regard to white women. So I would love your thoughts on that, because I've been thinking about this a lot over the last 24 hours, thinking about, for example, what happened in Charlottesville and Heather Heyer in that particular case. And this is another one of those moments.
Well, So there's an inherent contradiction, as you noted, and a hypocrisy, because if the administration and some of the policies are being heralded as something that is to be protective of white womanhood, but what we see is the antithesis, not only with the murder of this woman yesterday, but also with all of the reproductive rights being squashed and laws being passed on local level and state level, and now attempts at the federal level and things going to the Supreme Court to really strip women, regardless of color, of their rights. Also going back, and I hope this isn't an aside, but to white supremacy, because we know that many of the anti-abortion laws are really designed to ensure that there is a repopulation of white babies, which is why the Proud Boys and other white nationalist groups love these anti-abortion laws. And so where does this leave us? This leaves us with an understanding that allyship is ever more important, because there are individuals who will vote against their own good, right? They'll vote against the things, and they'll promote the things that are really running antithetical to what is useful and good for them. And I think it is moments like this that so many who have supported this administration, whether it is people of color who have supported him, whether it is women who have supported this administration, or it is white men who have a moral consciousness and know right from wrong, this is the moment, regardless of political affiliation, to come together. Because people say, I'm not involved in politics. Honey, this is way beyond politics at this point. This is a battle of good and evil, without question. And so which side are we going to stand on? Because if we stand on the side over here, at some point you too will be burned. You don't have to be a black person or a brown person for the gamut to come down on you.
I love the way that you frame that, Doc, because I've been thinking about this ugly euphemism that people use to explain. We heard it with regard to the invasion in Venezuela, collateral damage, right? The collateral damage toward the legitimate objectives of the Trump administration. And there's a way in which Renee Nicole Good's life will be classified as collateral damage. But what people should remember, the very groups that you spoke to, is that the problem with collateral damage is what you're willing to put up or risk for some aim or some goal or some reward. And ultimately, the piper comes due and you have to pay that risk should you default. We're witnessing the default on American democracy. We're witnessing the underpinnings, the architecture of the republic crumbling. And there's a debt to pay. And ultimately, at some point, whether it is in blood, or in the very protections that these people have paid lip service to and believe that they're going to be able to maintain, even as they strip them from others who legitimately have a right to them, the cost will be high for all of us, but particularly for those who believe that they're somehow immune or anesthetized to the piper coming and ultimately the debt being due.
Right. And I want to ask you, because you have your ear to the ground in many ways, in Minneapolis. You've worked with local politicians, you've worked with civil rights organizations. So, and you may not know right now, but have you heard anything about kind of the mounting opposition, some of the ways that they are thinking about trying to push back? I mean, your mayor has been wonderfully outspoken, as has the governor. But what kind of actual tangible actions do they have at hand right now that they have talked about using? Do you know anything about kind of their next steps?
I've seen a number of things here that I'm encouraged about. I appreciate the fact that the governor's office and both the mayor's office in St. Paul and in Minneapolis, even though Melvin Carter is outgoing now and we have a new mayor coming in, Mayor Herr, and Jacob Fry just won re-election in November, and his administration is coming in now. But they are making an effort to be very clear and thoughtful about the ways in which they articulate the duties of the municipal police departments in the Twin Cities. Now, there's been some question in St. Paul. There was a really ugly incident last month where the argument was that St. Paul police had supported and participated with ICE agents. And there was an immediate backlash and pushback by some politicians in this community who said, this is not what we expect from our local law enforcement. And we've certainly heard the governor make a full-throated articulation of this. I think the closing of schools today
Yes.
was a great example. Now, again, there'll be a critique offered, but this was in defense of young people in the community, not just those kids who are at risk of being taken away, but also the young people who witnessed this. And again, there's the collateral damage, the payment that will come due by the traumatizing spectacle that will come from this. And this desire to kind of maintain peace and good order. And then last but not least, I think I've been encouraged by what I've heard from some elements of law enforcement. And I want to be clear. The Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, you had some law enforcement agents yesterday offer a full-throated defense, not of ICE, but of the police, and saying that they were concerned about what Mayor Fry and others said, because if you start to erode support for police, then ultimately you're eroding this kind of thin blue line that we're all dependent on for our protection. But you have other law enforcement officers who've been very clear that what we saw was unlawful and disorderly. Like, this is not law enforcement, right? This is something else. It is a political agenda. I think that's important to have elected officials and police officials name it, because the naming of it is very important.
I mean, and this, naming it, as you're saying, 5 years almost to the day, of January 6th, but also in a city where its police legacy is hinged so much on the murder of George Floyd. And you had the complete failure of this kind of municipal branch of police officers in what they did, and the failures so many times along the way. And now, in some ways, we are relying on this same kind of police department to do the right thing, to investigate this, and they are, to your point, rising to the occasion in many ways. So is that false hope, or what are we doing here?
It might be in this sense, Doc, and I'd love your thoughts on this as well. I think the Trump administration did something that was very telling a few months ago, when on the eve of the commemoration of the 5th year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, they pulled out of the consent decree.
Yeah.
And I believe that was done to inflict maximum pain and harm, trauma on this community.
Pause you, because not everybody will know what that means, because we had consent degrees that were between the Department of Justice and local police departments all over the country. Can you tell the audience kind of what that meant?
Sure. So the Minnesota Department of Human Rights had negotiated a consent decree with the city of Minneapolis, but then there was also supposed to be a federal consent decree around what we call constitutional policing. So the Minnesota Department of Human Rights was really about violations of human rights under Minnesota law. But this federal decree would have gone one step further, really emphasizing the important aspects of policing around the federal government. So First Amendment, 14th Amendment violations. Checks and balances is so important.
The federal government, right.
Absolutely. And those two would have worked in concert to really provide a floor for the Minneapolis police, as it has in other communities and other departments, for how to reform and reimagine policing in those communities around those bedrock constitutional principles.
Right.
When the Trump administration pulled out, what they were really emphasizing is something the president has said consistently, not just in his second term, but in his first term, that we need to take the handcuffs off police.
Right.
I think the cavalier speech that Pete Hegseth gave to the armed forces is indicative of the way that the Trump administration thinks about all agents of the federal government who are armed in community.
ICE agents. We need to
Absolutely.
take the cuffs off of ICE agents, poorly trained, many of them coming in because they have some kind of a vendetta against people who don't look like them, because the assumption is they haven't risen to where they want to go because somebody's taken it from them. So they come in from that positionality. And now this administration saying, to your point, just like we did with police departments and we're trying to do with the military, we will do with you as well. I mean, think about what they're trying to do to Senator Mark Kelly from the state I'm in Arizona. Here's a man who very kind of earnestly and honestly told armed forces, you do not have to follow illegal orders. And in his position, not only as a retired officer of the armed forces, but also the committee that he sits on as a sitting senator, has a right and almost an obligation to do so. And now they are trying, I mean, the president called for him to be hanged, first of all, and now they're trying to demote him and reduce his retirement funds. And so anybody who is going to push against the administration saying that any arm of our agency can do whatever they want to do to carry out our unjust orders, if you interrupt that, you're going to be in trouble. Just like Renee, who is then murdered in Minneapolis.
And who conveniently, because of who she was, has been a very easy person for the MAGA faithful to vilify, to create a narrative about, when in fact this is a mother with a partner who was living, who woke up yesterday, as many of us do, and was going about the business of her life and had her life taken because of this invasionary force that now occupies this city under very questionable directive from the federal government. All of this was avoidable, and yet it's not avoidable with an administration, to your point, Doc, that is committed to inflicting maximum suffering, because that helps to deflect away from the way that they've deviated from other things that the president promised, including no foreign adventuring, which we've seen consistently, and bringing us to the brink of war in some of these endeavors. So I'm deeply concerned. I think that again, people shouldn't lose hope.
No.
The worst thing that we can do in this moment is to lose hope. But I also think it's important for folks to say her name.
To say her name.
Say her name.
Yes, and she has a 6-year-old son whose father died in 2023, and now the child does not have the father nor the mother. It has its additional mother and grandparents, but this is a child who their biological parents are gone. And I mean, it kind of takes my words away. It's so horribly sad. A woman who wrote poetry and played guitar, and by all accounts was a lovely person. And even the way that they have mischaracterized the narrative, if you watch the video, and I know a lot of people out here are going to say, I can't watch the video, I understand. But if you watch the video, she is waving people by. And I ask people to think about, or when you are talking to people who say, oh, well, she did XYZ. If you are in a car and masked men who don't identify themselves jump out of the car in the angry way that they did and come to your car and try to open the door to pull you out, she actually reacted in my opinion, in a more suppressed way than she could have, given the circumstances.
Particularly as a woman. Right. And the inherent threat that was posed. And to your point, listening to some of the people who want to, talk about she disobeyed lawful authority. This was a violation, clearly, of what is on the Department of Homeland Security and ICE's website with regard to use of force. I think if folks were being honest, that would clearly be the centerpiece of the discussion. But the honesty is something that is clearly not a hallmark or calling card of this administration. Having said that, the other thing that bothers me that kind of flew under the radar today is what Robert Kennedy said in his comments about young people of not being able to serve in the military because they have these disqualifying disorders. So the whole thing is that he's trying to deal with this issue because he wants to make sure that these young people can be conscripted. Now, he didn't say that explicitly, but there's no other way to interpret what he shared other than to say, what do you mean military-aged people who will be disqualified because they have these... This is
and what is that signaling to us? It is signaling a ramping up of imperialism. It is signaling, as you noted, conscription. That has been something that people have been talking about, and they are dropping those kind of warnings to us all over the place. Okay, listen, I'm going to be honest and say in this moment, it's overwhelming for me. And I, like you, we are in the business of hope. Right? We do this work and we share with people because we understand what came before us and we understand how we can be empowered and inspired by the past. We know the obstacles that preceded us and we know how people have worked very successfully to dismantle those obstacles. Intellectually, we know this and we teach it and we definitely believe it. And yet, sometimes we are discouraged. But, and I think, Dr. Williams, I can speak fairly for myself and for you in saying that discouragement, that does not define us. We are still defined by hope because of what we know, because we know that we can win. But it takes work on our part. And so everybody who is listening, we have to think about how you can use your individual platforms to create change, to create people's hearts and minds. We are in the middle of entering right now an election year, the midterms. This is a real chance for change. when we have most of Congress up for re-election. And so I really do want people to think about what you can do to help create that change. I mean, everybody knows the Institute is part of a larger organization, Common Power, and we mobilize volunteers for voters. And so, I'm asking people right now, come and knock on doors with us. And I say this sometimes, but I don't say it always with such passion. This is where we can create change. We have to create a different group of individuals creating policy right now. It is not the only way, but it is a big way. And it is something that is sitting in front of us. And Trump said to a group of Republicans the other day when he was speaking to them at the Kennedy Center, he said, if Democrats get in office, they're going to impeach me. Great. So let's help get Democrats in office, mostly to help buffer marginalized and vulnerable people from the iniquitous policies that are being produced by this administration.
Absolutely. And, Mary Phillips has a new biography out on Erica Huggins, came out last year. And she talked about Erica Huggins, who was a member of the Black Panther Party when she was in prison, and she kind of privileges her spiritual journey. And she talks about, and I love the way that you frame this, Dr. Scott, Erica Huggins really having a practice of hope.
Yeah.
I mean, she doesn't frame it in that way, but she talks about, for example, one of the things that Erica Huggins did when she was in prison, in addition to a yoga practice, was cleaning the mirrors in the prison so the women who were in prison could better see themselves. I think we need to do some cleaning of our mirrors and making sure that we lean into the humanity of those that we share community with. Amplifying voices that have been marginalized, finding ways to really lean into what it means to be a community, and then using that to empower us to do something that another Black Panther woman talked about, and this would be Elaine Brown, when she said, the Black Panthers were, through their breakfast program and their social programs, trying to move people to want some abstract thing called freedom. So if you could give breakfast to school children, and if you could offer political education classes, you can meet the basic needs of people. Maybe eventually you could help them really appreciate this abstract thing called freedom.
Right.
Door knocking, getting involved with organizations like Common Power, really kind of recognizing that this is an election year. There is a great deal at stake. Is not this abstract thing called freedom. It's this very real thing that is absolute immunity for law enforcement officers, the chaos that we're seeing in our foreign policy, the absolute crumbling of anything that we associate with constitutional protections.
Yeah.
These are the things that we really have to organize to protect. It's not just voting against a tyrant.
No.
It is voting to protect those things which are flawed and need improvement and need reimagination, but they're a floor, and we don't want to lose that floor.
Right, voting against policy changes that say children don't need meningitis shots, or that we should all drink whole milk and eat cheese and steak now, which was the newest recommendation, that saturated fat is our friend and not something that will kill us. These are not minor things, because there are a number of people who will follow those things, and then such as the anti-vaccine regulations that are coming out of the administration put other people at danger. And so I think we kind of close out here, because I love that analogy of cleaning our own mirrors. So, and there's kind of a double entendre there, right? Because it is see our own beauty, and then to remind us of the power that we have. We see, you have to see yourself to say, I matter and I can do something about this. And we
Absolutely
can.
True.
So let's go. My heart goes out to you being there. I knew it was tough because I texted you yesterday, and you're always so quick to text me back, and you didn't. And I thought, there's a lot going on. And so my heart goes out to you. And also, I just want to recognize, because I don't think most people know all that you do, how much of a force you are in Minneapolis for creating change for people. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Appreciate that, Doc, and the feeling is mutual. In fact, it's my association with Common Power, having been a We the People scholar, that really helped me to continue that work despite my responsibilities at the university. So I'm appreciative for the work that you do and for the work that the Institute has empowered me to continue to do.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dr. Williams. Good to see you.
Good to see you, sis.